Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pitts. Your frontline update for the 18th of November 2024. It's been a couple of days since I've done an update, so we should expect to see quite a bit of movement on the front lines, no doubt down on the eastern front line, down near the bottom of the Donetsk Oblast. We're going to start as we normally do up in the north by Kursk. If you don't know what the lines on my map mean, please check out the screen, pause the video to see the key. Just to remind you that on my website ATP Distilled, that is linked in the description below, there are lots of things that you can see and enjoy. You can get an AI transcription of all of my videos. It's actually not just a transcription, it's a distilled synopsis of all my videos. You can go and check them out, please do so. But also there is a distillation of the Institute for the Study of War daily report, which is also pretty useful. If you don't have time to go through the whole report, you can see this distilled version of the entire report, which is very useful. I've already looked at it for today. Right, okay, we're going to go to Kursk and see that indeed sorry, the internet's being a bit funky for me. We can see that there are no changes. Sorry, I wasn't even in Kursk because I was expecting some pins. No, there are no changes here to the two mappers, Andrew Perpetua and Surat maps, showing quite a bit of difference right across this whole region. And there have been these accusations recently. In fact, it's in the Institute for the Study of War. We'll have a look at this because it is causing a bit of an issue with the people who are involved, such as those in the 3rd Combined Arms Army who have been sacked, but it causes a bit of an issue with mapping. So as you can see here, there are huge differences in the mapping interpretations between the two mappers. A famous one we'll talk about as we come to it, but just to remind you, Bilo, Hrivka there, the two mappers have a considerable difference of opinion around here, where one seems to think the Russians are in Bilo, Hrivka, and actually it was previously even more extensive for the Russian gains there. Now, if we look to the Institute for the Study of War, Russian mill bloggers have actively highlighted their purported influence in the removal of the 3rd Combined Arms Army commanders due to falsified reports praising the responsiveness of the Russian Ministry of Defense leadership compared to previous administration under Sergei Shoigu. This highlights the ongoing power dynamics and influence of the mill blogger community with the Russian information space and military decision-making processes. So what was claimed is that the Russian commanders are making false reports of what's going on the front line, that's sending that up the hierarchy of command, so that then the Russian MOD makes these claims that we are in control of Bilo, Hrivka, when in fact they aren't in control of Bilo, Hrivka, and that was in fact a lie from a commander. Then it comes back and bites them on the arse, because not being in command of a place means that you end up thinking you control that, drive into this particular place thinking, well, we control this area, we're going to drive into there, and it turns out the Ukrainians are there and you get hammered. This has happened up in Kursk, is another supposedly another example of these lying about what you control and then getting into trouble. And in fact, this has been reported in, I think, reporting from Ukraine and Euromaidan Press, etc., etc. And that is around this area, Malaya Lokhnya, and possible areas surrounding there, where the Russians have ended up getting themselves somewhat surrounded due to issues of mapping potentially. So indeed, let's have a look at this. Here's the Kursk map I was just showing you. Let's go back to my map. We're talking about this area there, just north of Malaya Lokhnya, where the Euromaidan Press says Russian low-level commanders reported false claims to their military leadership about capturing 4 strategic villages in Kursk Oblast, which resulted in 2 Russian units becoming trapped without supplies or reinforcement options. And that then caused, it appears, people to be captured here. PS01 says, breaking news, bad and good news in Kursk. So Z channels report the disappearance of 60 soldiers from the 22nd Motorized Rifle Regiment in Kursk region. I don't know if it's exactly there, but I'm speculating that these could be those people who were surrounded, and there are missing in action. They are tearfully asking the Russian leadership to exchange them. 60 MIA is a serious concern. That's in the Voronezh area, so actually I would need to look where that is. But nonetheless, even if these people aren't the ones in trouble north of Malaya Lokhnya, then we are seeing that sort of thing happen around Kursk, whereby there are claims of controlling certain areas, and that causing issues for the Russians in their own maneuvers. But anyway, no change to Kursk. Having said all of that, if we go to War Mapper, they say Russia has continued to diminish Ukrainian control within the Kursk region, crossing the Snagost River into Darino and repelling last week's Ukrainian attempt to hold the line at Novaya-Venivka. Additionally, Russian forces are clearing grey zones in the north west. So that's interesting. We were down here. There were some really serious battles around Novaya-Venivka. Actually, that's over there. The war mapper here is claiming that actually that is now fallen to the Russians and they are now in control of Novaya-Venivka. That's over there, you can see. And then talking about the taking of the village of Darino down here and crossing the Snagost River. Snagost was all the way back over here, so I presume that's the river that comes up here, but not 100% sure. So War Mapper saying, look, the Russians are taking back large areas of this Kursk sector, and that is worrying for the Ukrainians, but it is coming at huge costs. Having 60 prisoners of war, MIA, being surrounded, losing hand over fist so much equipment and personnel that is being verified by visual confirmation. This is a very difficult sector for the Russians. Then they say Russia's secured control of the settlement at Prokrovsk in the southeast of this area. So Prokrovsk just around there. We'll go and look at that on my map, which is over in this area, and we come down to Prokrovsk there. So that is more in line with what Surat Map says as opposed to what Andrew Perpetua is saying. Although, yeah, recent land taken by Russia, that's this light pink. This is grey zone, that's slightly darker pink there. But yeah, it seems according to War Mapper that the Russians have made some fairly significant gains all around here. We'll see whether Andrew has confirmation of that in the days to come. Okay, but other than that, actually no changes to that area. Some gains over here for Andrew Perpetua here, agreeing that the Russians are in control of this small border village of Sotnitsky Kozachok, which has seen the Russians attack over the border from the north there, rather similar to what we had seen elsewhere, although on a slightly smaller scale there. A worry for the Ukrainians. We'll see if they do anything about that. And then we come on to Kupyansk, where the Russians, according to Surat Maps, are pushing further into the area of Kupyansk to the east of the Oskil River as it splits Kupyansk in two. And you have these other areas. I don't know the name of this part of Kupyansk. It could be that there, but you've got some numbers and whatnot. Anyway, on the way to Hrivka, over further to the east. So the Russians appearing to be establishing themselves in Kupyansk, and that is a worry. Again, though, that is, according to Surat Maps, no change to the Pischany sector, as I call it, right up to the Oskil River there. So that's good news for the Ukrainians. Forget those pins inland there. That's a bit of a glitch. And we have some small gains for the Russians between Nevska and Makivka further down that northeastern sector, where the Russians are now in control of a couple of fields there. Nothing too serious. And in fact, no change all the way down until we get to Chaziv area. But just remember that Bilo Hrivka here is possibly one of the instances of the 3rd Combined Arms Army commanders lying about what areas have been taken and are under their control, and it could well be that the Russians aren't nearly as far to the west as they are there. Okay, then Seversk we'll come to. So first of all, we have Grayskull saying the Ukrainians reclaimed territory near Seversky. So this is in the Velikonovo-Silka area, I believe, and that would be up here. And I think it's going to be this area. Let's see if we can put that. Yes, so that is that large reservoir there, and taking back this area. And of course, we don't really have that under Russian control, but there were these claims from Surat Maps, if you remember, that the Russians had taken loads of land around here, and I think they were rejigged, am I correct in saying, and took it right back to here, but I could be wrong on that. But anyway, that could be Grayskull reacting to what was initially possibly incorrect mapping from the Russians, and saying actually they don't control that. So anyway, no change to the Seversk front line otherwise. And then we get to an awful lot of pins around Bakhmut, around Chaziv, where there's an awful lot going on. What do we have to say? So Surat Map says Russian army has begun assaulting the refractory plant at the center of Chaziv. And if we go into look at the mapping there, they're pushing further and further into Chaziv. But before we get to that central part, it's worth noting that the Russians, according to Surat Maps, are pushing further to the northwest, north of Chaziv, around Velikonovo-Silka. Oh, I haven't said that in a long time. That was during the Bakhmut counter, or the offensive after the Ukrainian counteroffensive, where the Russians were fighting up back up this road, and the Ukrainians were fighting down it, Russians were fighting back up there, and that's where they got to now. Then we have some gains further to the south around Hrivka, although there's a bit of rejigging such that the Russians don't actually control all of that forest area around, or all of that the village area of Hrivka. But yeah, so the Russians pushing northwest there according to Surat Maps. And then when we come to Chaziv itself, we have Andrew Perpetua moving his lines further into Chaziv, central Chaziv, which is a worry. It means that, as we see so often, Surat Maps does make these very confident claims about Russian gains, but it's not that they won't come true. It's often that they aren't true at the time he makes them, but actually later the Russians do end up taking that ground because they'll just keep pushing and pushing and pushing, and it's worrying that the Russians seem to have robust control over areas of Chaziv to the west of the canal as it comes down there towards Kupyansk. And interestingly, though, so this is bad news for the Ukrainians. Good news here, and it could be that Surat Maps is rejigging, that maybe they never really had robust control around Istopochki, or on the way to Istopochki along this T0504 highway that goes all the way down to Antonivka and then to Prokrovsk. But this that's good news, and that means that Chaziv won't be as surrounded or as vulnerable from the south as it would have been. But there's a lot of fighting going on in Chaziv at the moment. It is definitely a tough place to be. Just trying to work out, no, this is Karakovo. We'll talk about that later. Okay, so moving on down from there, we have some small gains, as according to Andrew Perpetua, for the Russians around Klishchivka. The Ukrainians seem to finally be being pushed back towards that canal and eventually over it, but that's not too much of a worry. I'm amazed that they've held out for as long as they have to the east of that canal. Then when we come down to Turetsk and New York area, Turetsk, the Russians are having some small, forget that pin, there are a few glitches today. They're having some gains to the southern part of Turetsk, moving through a lot of this very well built up area, and that is Surat Maps showing those big old gains there. I say big gains, it might not be in terms of sheer square kilometers, but actually when you've got densely populated area like this with a lot of buildings and whatnot, then actually that is pretty meaningful ground to take. Yeah, it has to be said though, Turetsk isn't quite the town it once was. Another one of these liberation equals rubblizing scenarios. Then we come to the Prokrovsk front, and no change to the north, which is good. Some changes, small changes to this, I guess, the westerly edge of it, which is a worry because this is around where the main Ukrainian trenches are. But some small amounts of ground taken by the Russians, the odd field here and there. Another Hrivka there. Who knew? And yes, so the Russians having some gains in that area. And then as we come towards Karakovo on the way down there, we see some small gains for the Russians on the southern part of that Prokrovsk front. And then just north of the Vovcha reservoir, north of Karakovo itself, they are inching forward through
the fields there towards the town of Turetsk there, which is on that northern shore of there. They've taken Ilyinka. We hear that has fallen, although it must be worth mentioning. Is worth mentioning that there are two Ilyinkas very close to each other. I don't think it's this one that has been taken. I think they are referring to the one just north of the Karakovo-Vodcha River reservoir there. But they are apparently, according to Surat maps, the Russians in control of 20% of Karakovo now. Let's go and see what they have to say. So the situation of the Ukrainian army is much more difficult than it seems. The Russian army has completely broken through the eastern defences of Karakovo. There were and are not enough troops to fill the trenches. Danya is about to be taken by the Russians. So this is the town just south of Karakovo that is... it's bad news that falls because this was supposed to be really well defended, but I just don't think the Ukrainians have enough in the tank anywhere along the front lines. It's going to be interesting to see where the Anne of Kiev French-trained unit is going to be stationed, what they would do. It's a difficult one because a unit like that, so you've got 2,500 troops, 4,500 in total, with all their French-supplied Caesars and VABs, and I don't know what tanks they're going to get, but they'll be well equipped to, you would assume, ideally do an offensive somewhere. Is that the sort of use that you would have for a newly trained whole big old unit like that? Would you just plug them into a defensive position along the front line, or do you throw them at the Russians somewhere as an offensive, or do you do a counter-offensive along the front lines? Do you do active defense, counter-attack? Could you envisage that the Russians are actually fairly exhausted themselves right across these front lines? And if you put 4,500 or 2,500 Ukrainians who are hopefully well-trained with quite a bit of decent kit, you put them somewhere around here, maybe you could burst through the Russian defences or their offensive line, essentially. But then, of course, the Russians will see those Ukrainians coming. They'll have eyes in the sky, no doubt, and they'll see an amassing of those Ukrainian troops. So it's going to be interesting to see what the Ukrainians decide to do with regard to newly trained units. But you can see here that around Karakovo, the Russians making those gains, filling in this hole, and it looks like these towns along this, probably a river there, are not, that's a river there, are not going to be long for Ukrainian control. You got Uspanivka that gets mentioned quite a lot, and I think it gets mentioned here. So not enough troops. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian retreat is accelerating in the southern salient. Combing operations in Antonivka are already taking place since the abandonment of the locality to the western defences. So that is Antonivka, which is over here. So that has been abandoned, according to Surat maps. And then they go on to say, in addition, Russian forces are advancing easily north of Makivka and Boholyavlenka, which is, as we come over to here, so it's Boholyavlenka and Makivka, I'm not sure. Oh, yeah, over here. So advancing north in both these areas, according to Surat maps. Troops are closer to Konstantinopolska than to Uspanivka. Okay, so that's saying they're closer to this town than they are to Uspanivka, which is a worry, because you might get a situation where the Russians cut off the Ukrainians by coming through here, joining up with Danya, and then all of this area suddenly falls to the Russians. So that is definitely a worry for the Ukrainians. Most worryingly, the order to withdraw from Karakovo has not yet been given, and withdrawal is becoming less feasible by the day. Only the urban area and a thermal power station offer a place of cover and entrenchment. However, from a military point of view, the Ukrainian fortresses' days are numbered, they say, or he says. So it's not looking good around Karakovo, but to be honest, I've been saying for some time, you'll see a equalising off of this whole front line there. It's a huge shame, because this is actually fairly well defended in terms of built fortifications, but of course you can have wonderful fortifications. If you don't have the manpower to man those trench lines and fortifications, then it's all kind of a moot point. Now, interesting that there's a bit of a change here. I don't know that the Ukrainians have counterattacked, but Makarivka, which is north of Staromyorsk in this Velikonovo-Silka area, has been either taken back by the Ukrainians or never was taken by the Russians. There is talk about Velikonovo-Silka there being fighting there soon. It is very close to the front line, both from the south and the east, worrying for Velikonovo-Silka. and some glitchy points there, I think. Yeah, so ignore those. A few of them today, I should have cleaned them up. Sorry. And then as we come along to the Robotyne area, this is north of Verbove. The Russians taking some fields just west of Novopokrovka there. Some more movement for the Russians according to Syriac maps. And that is that. So not great for the Ukrainians. The Russians still taking considerable amounts of territory, but it's possibly slowed down compared to what it was over the last couple of weeks. But still many places along the front lines that are a worry. Chaziv is looking very precarious. And then, of course, all the usual places like Turetsk, Prokrovsk direction. Then you've got all Karakovo area, Velikonovo-Silka. Then you've got that northeastern front right up to Pischany and then up to Kupyansk when they're coming down into Kupyansk. And then the northern border is just like relentless. And of course, the Russians are putting massive effort into trying to take back this area in Kursk, where the Ukrainians have the best forces. This is possibly, it's going to be tough for the Ukrainians, but they are supposedly doing a pretty good job of repelling the Russians there. It's rather like Bakhmut previously, where I said in hindsight, Bakhmut, I think, well, not even in hindsight at the time, I was saying, I think this has been attritionally beneficial for the Ukrainians. I think some people completely disagree and think Bakhmut was a complete failure of Ukrainian command. I actually think it was the end of Wagner, it's the end of Prigozhin, and the collapse of Wagner as an organization, and literally the death of Prigozhin can be linked to their failure at Bakhmut. Their success, they succeeded, right? They took Bakhmut, but they were absolutely attrited hugely. And now the Ukrainians lost a lot themselves there, but the Russians lost phenomenal numbers of troops in Bakhmut. And I think Kursk is somewhat similar to that, and Ukrainians may be using the same kind of rationale, which is we hold on to this, it's a bargaining chip, it's within Russia are going to be super peed off, it becomes a PR thing for Russia. And you could argue for Ukraine as well, and you could argue the same with Bakhmut. It was a PR thing for Ukraine, but actually I think it's a PR thing for Russia. They were desperate to take Bakhmut. It was going to be there, yeah, we've taken Bakhmut, look how amazing we are. And of course, now, so what type thing as far as a whole grand scheme of things is concerned. I think Kursk is the same, where the Russians are so desperate to take it, they're going to throw everything at the Ukrainians there, and that gives the Ukrainians an opportunity to actually attrit the Russians at quite a considerable level, and that is happening. That is empirically happening. You look at Andrew Perpetua's team, just counting up the equipment that's being lost there, phenomenal numbers of equipment, and also large numbers of personnel. And then if ATACMs are allowed to be used in the area to a greater degree, and we are hearing, the rumours are that Storm Shadow and Scalp EGs can be used into Kursk now. That's the latest. I'll do a bit of a breaking news update on that, I think, in a minute. You could get a situation where actually the Russians could be, and North Koreans could be attrited at significant levels if they can target some of those bases of North Korean troops and Russian troops. If you've got 50,000 troops in this area, you're going to have a fairly high density of Russian personnel, and that means that there will be many more targets. Easy pickings, one could argue, for the Ukrainians. So yeah, it can cut both ways. The Ukrainians may lose Kursk. They almost certainly will lose Kursk, and I said that all along. It's like they did that to attract the Russians to take it. Unfortunately for the Ukrainians, they didn't bank on, and I can't blame them, they didn't bank on the Russians putting on tens of thousands of North Korean troops. But since they are there, then the Ukrainians need to attrit them. That's the job they've got to do, unfortunately. And if they can do that because they're so densely amassed there, then possibly this works to Ukraine's overall net favour. But I guess time will indeed tell, as the annoying Russian troll Geraman often says, time will tell. Right, anyway, that's enough from me. Disagree or agree, let me know in the comments if you think that analysis is way off or not. In the meantime, take care, and I'll speak to you soon. Please like, subscribe, and share, and I would really appreciate that. Take care.